Hello, everyone. Warm welcome to this week's community call, super special edition because Sudo is not here, so I'm hosting today for you. My name is Hux. I'm doing UX at Nym, and I have with me on the radio studio none other than Jaya Klara Brekke, who's our CSO at Nym. How are you doing, Jaya? Say hi to our beautiful audience.
Hello, beautiful audience. I'm very well today, and super happy to be here. There's been a lot going on, so I'm glad that we could manage to do a little community update despite Sudo taking a well-deserved holiday.
Yeah, and we're also free to do whatever we want because he's not around to,
Yes.
discipline us if we go off script or anything like that. So, with that said, warm welcome to everyone who's joining now to the stream. I thought about, or we actually discussed this before this call, that we're gonna start with a bit of recap because last week has been really busy at Nym and lots of things are happening as we move forward with the launch of the Nym VPN. So, what happened last week, Jaya? Can you tell us?
Well, a lot happened last week. It was an incredibly eventful week, both positive and negative in the extremes on both ends. So, um, let's
Let's
start
go
with the
with
positive.
positive.
Yeah. Always positive first. So on the positive front, we had a really great event. So Web3 Summit is one of the nicer crypto events, in my opinion. Really good summit, always brings some really good people together. It's held in Berlin, and Harry Halpin, the CEO, he was there to effectively launch our new public beta version of the Nym VPN. So, as some of you might know, the Nym VPN Alpha has been a kind of private launch over the past many months as we kind of test and improve a lot of things, both on the kind of front end and on the back end. But now we have an actual app out there that anybody can download and use and send us feedback on. So it's pretty exciting. It's actually very exciting. So yeah, that's one of the big positive news from last week.
Just as you say, it's super super exciting because the big change is that now the kind of downloads are open, so it's a lot more accessible for everyone to just download and try the software, which is when the moment when pedal being put to the metal, like this is when the rubber hits the road, or this
Yeah,
is where we actually see how our mixed net infrastructure can hold up for real time in VPN users. Yeah,
yeah,
so that
exactly.
sounds super cool. And can you tell a bit more about the negative stuff, maybe, if very
Sure,
briefly?
but maybe we continue a little bit more with the positive stuff. What do you think? I think Harry. So like, actually, I would encourage anybody to watch Harry's talk. There's always a kind of special vibe about when Harry speaks at Web3 Summit because the actual stage. I don't know if anyone's been. But the stage is kind of organized as an amphitheater almost. So it creates this quite kind of like an epic environment. And so a lot of the talks from this year's summit was really focused on a return to kind of cypherpunk values, basically, especially ahead of the upcoming U.S. elections and how elections have been playing out around Europe. Um, so it was really a kind of like call to action to return to the early cypherpunk values, and we're seeing that actually come through also a lot the in DevCon, the upcoming DevCon. I've been a little bit involved in that, the planning around that too, and we're seeing that mood kind of across ecosystems right now. Is like generally the Web3 space is very much focusing back in on privacy, decentralization, some of the kind of core values, because we're kind of up against the wall. There's just so many current affairs and events that are, overtaking what in hindsight looks like some fairly comfortable years of chilling around and trying to build stuff. And now it's like this stuff has got to work, man, because otherwise we're in trouble. Giving the kind of rise of yeah, quite violent fascist tendencies. So.
Do
Um,
you think would you consider this moment like as the whole space is maturing and we're really finding out together how those core values are actually super important to be implemented across tools and all the things that we're building together, or it's more of a kind of, I don't know, escape hype, or like
I would say it's a hopeful return to core values, and I'm hoping it's going to go along with maturing. What maturing actually means to me in this space right now is that those values are not just like marketing slogans, because that's been a little bit too much the case, and we've seen a kind of discrepancy between like what is said in marketing materials and then what actually gets implemented on the technical front. And for me, maturity looks like getting rid of that discrepancy. And so we're actually building stuff that is usable, that is private by default, that solves people's real world problems, and isn't kind of like uh, you know, let's say calling for cypherpunk values, but just as a way to pump a token or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, so for me, maturing really means like solving real world problems for real world people, and there's plenty of those right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also feel that kind of this is also like a collective kind of not waking up, but kind of coming in terms with what's happening everywhere else. It's very apparent that things are not going well, and we see
Yeah,
escalating conflicts all over the board. So it's kind of what I see or read on tweet, even crypto Twitter, that people are asking the right questions a lot more times than they used to be. A
yeah,
lot more scrutiny to new projects which just use fancy buzzwords to shield their tokens. So it's like
yeah,
really, it really feels like there's real eyes on the prize now, because if we don't make it, that's really, really bad. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
this was the vibe at Web3 Summit too.
Yeah, and then there's other things that happen in Berlin too. Nym is, I can probably reveal, we're doing a bunch of work on rebranding at the moment. So there was a workshop that took place in Berlin on that too, where we met with our fantastic designer. So overall, last week was super positive on that front. On the negative side, I got ill, so I couldn't make it to Berlin. That was my
So
personal negative.
you're better now.
I'm much better now. I'm much better now.
Super nice.
But then we also had, a little bit of negative on the community side. People were quite worried about the OKX delisting that happened last week. It was a kind of unfortunate, event, and we are still in touch with the OKX people, and we're looking to resolve that on that front. But let's say on the positive side, uh, I can probably, this is called a selective disclosure call after all. So I can probably selectively disclose that we've been working for quite some time now on getting more native listings, and it's looking very positive on that front. So we should see some really good news on the listings front fairly soon. But I think it's also worth reminding people why listings are so important, and it really is because Nym after all is a utility token, and so we want the token to be available so that people can actually get their hands on native tokens, participate in the token economics, and actually bond Nym nodes and run the infrastructure, right? So it kind of serves very specific security functions and operational functions that, like, if it's not available for people, it just makes things, especially like our core aim of decentralization, a little bit more, or a lot more difficult. So this is why listings are important from the let's say operational perspective.
Yeah, and maybe we're gonna talk actually about what selective disclosure means if someone haven't heard this term yet later in this call. But also, I think I can also selective disclose that it's quite hard to get a native. It's harder to get a native Nym listing in place on an exchange than to do an ERC20 listings. And so just for people on the call to know that it's actually a lot more convincing it takes for exchanges to list Cosmos native tokens. And there's purely technical or I don't know laziness reasons for this, right? Because they're not really used to list the Cosmos tokens. It's kind of a pain for them to derail from their main listing process and do something specific. So yeah, I'm also super happy to hear that there's something cooking there on this front. Can we tell a little bit more, or not yet at this point, do you think?
Not quite yet,
Okay,
unfortunately. Not quite yet. Yeah.
okay, fair. Uh, maybe would you mind sharing some of Harry also went to another super cool conference the same after Berlin, which is the Baltic Honey Badger conference. It's like a Bitcoin maxi event in Riga, Latvia, and I've seen the creatives, and it's like super cool Bitcoin Godzilla screaming lightnings on its mouth or something. So could you share us how that went and what was maybe the highlights for that for in terms of Nym or for Harry?
I mean, so I wasn't there myself, so it's hard for me to kind of speak
Yeah.
to that exactly. But the highlights definitely were just following on from the launch of the public beta is just getting people's hands on the public beta and for them to actually try things out. There was a lot of excitement around, I think like Harry met with Jack Dorsey and a few other kind of like big characters that were quite kind of like excited by Nym, and especially excited also about like all the work that we've been doing in the background on ZK NIMs and eCash. So effectively like how to actually make the payments for the VPN private, and also the potential other use cases for a schema like that. So those, as far as I know, were some of the main highlights. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can chime in some info here. So I think Harry mentioned that he met with Adam Beck, OG Cypherpunk, and he was super excited about the ZK NIM stuff, which is actually quite a big thing. So maybe my next question to you would be: so could we talk a little bit about why what happened with ZK NIMs now with the public beta, and why this matters, and why is it a really cool thing that we're doing, enabling anonymous payments for VPN users?
Yeah. So as it turns out, I'm trying to think where to start with this story. So basically, like, as it turns out, financial data is actually one of the most sensitive data out there. So a lot can be assessed or understood about a person's lifestyle, class, shopping habits, psychology, everything from understanding their financial data. So that's the first point that I want to make, because many times when people hear about private transactions or eCash or this sort of thing, they immediately think about crime, and there's a lot of like paranoia around private transactions. But really, when you think about it, it's kind of just a normalizing of what goes on in the digital space to a level that is similar to the physical space as usual. So
To
like
cash.
cash, basically. Yeah. So that's why this has been such a kind of like hot topic, and eCash has obviously been something that people have been working on for many years. I mean, a few decades now, and was the kind of initial inspiration for Bitcoin as well. So it's no wonder that people at the Bitcoin conference are particularly excited about this topic. What it means for us more practically at this point in time, and with our specific use case of the mixnet for more general purpose privacy, is that we're trying to like solve privacy of traffic in transit in a holistic manner, which means that we don't want really people's identities and financial details to be tied to the fact that they're using the mixnet, because that kind of compromises people's anonymity. So what we're trying to do here is make sure that when people actually pay for using the Nym VPN, that payment information is delinked from the fact of actually using the VPN. Otherwise, we kind of, we create a kind of vulnerability in that link there. So
This is
that's the main use of ZK NIMs initially, but like ZK NIMs, the schema is actually like useful for a lot of different use cases, including more general purpose eCash. So this is what's so exciting about the public beta, is that when people try this out, this isn't just about like trying out another VPN, and it's not even just about trying out another VPN that actually has a mixnet, which is already a huge feat in and of itself, but it's also trying out the credentials and the credentialing, right? So this is what's so exciting, and it's also why, like at this point in time, the let's say onboarding experience is a little bit clunky, right? Because this is an entirely new setup.
paradigm. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a new paradigm, and a lot of work is going to go into making that whole experience a lot more seamless over the next couple of months.
Yeah, maybe we're getting to a point in the call when it's a good time to talk a little bit about what selective disclosure means, and why this is a new paradigm in itself, that I can really delink my payment information from an application that I'm using. And there's another lawyer term that's being thrown around quite a lot, connection to this, is like plausible deniability. So basically there is no legal way to connect my application usage to my payment. And this is, compared to how surveillance capitalism works today, this is where the game changes, and this is where we just say that no, we don't give our connected data to all the entities around us. Yeah.
Yeah.
So sorry, that wasn't the question. It was like a longer rant. So sorry, but I got lost there for a second. Yeah. So what I wanted to ask is that maybe let's broaden the scope, step back one step, and this is technical implementation of selective disclosure, ZK NIMS. But what selective disclosure actually kind of means, and how to imagine this information exchange if it's not the usual way that you as the surveiller know everything about me as the user.
Yeah. So selective disclosure it sounds complicated. And the reason why it's complicated is because it's describing something that all of us are used to by default. So, when like you're trying to it's the same as like the fish in the water of like, how do you describe water to a fish when all they know is water, right? It's a little bit like that with selective disclosure. Like when we go around living our lives, we're talking to some person in like a shop that we walk into, or we're speaking to our mother, or we're speaking to a friend, or we're speaking to a colleague or our boss or whatever. In each of those relationships, we are already practicing selective disclosure, which basically means that we're making a lot of like, whether subconscious or conscious decisions around what do we actually want to talk to this person about, and how much about ourselves do we want to reveal to this person. And it's not because we're trying to hide anything necessarily. It's more just like what is appropriate, right? What makes sense for this particular relationship. Um, so that's something that we're used to, and that's like that's the norm of the ordinary world. But the problem is that the digital world doesn't actually function that way.
And no one told us this. No one told us this. That is not
No
the
one
same.
told us
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
It's very new information. It's frankly a fairly new paradigm also. I mean, really, you know, yeah, like the whole it's a new paradigm that's come about as a result of the normalization of mass surveillance, which, was really I mean, people kind of saw it coming in the 80s. That's kind of where cypherpunk kind of actually started, because people were like, oh my God, we're building the internet. The internet is really cool. And now we can all share information. But they could see that the internet was not built with privacy in mind. They could see that the internet was, leaking data all over the place. And they could already see how that could turn into, a mass surveillance nightmare. But it's useful to understand the difference, because people they like to use the word panopticon, which is from, George Orwell's 1989 novel. And, George Orwell was writing at a time where, there had been these big historical moments of totalitarianism sweeping across the world, right? In Russia and Europe in particular. And totalitarianism in the sense of like reconstructing truths and having like extreme exertion of disciplinary power. Um, and you had Bentham's panopticon as the kind of like the main mental model there, right? Where it's like we're watching what everybody's doing, and their bodies get disciplined if they're not doing things correctly, and they get incarcerated, and this sort of thing. Aspects of that is absolutely still happening, but the paradigm of surveillance that we're in now, and the way that we make sense of the world, is a different kind. So, where you had like a kind of disciplinary surveillance before that was very kind of like top down, now you have this like algorithmic surveillance, which is less about like kind of forcing people to reveal information or kind of watching them from the outside. And it's more kind of deeply psychological, actually. And it's by convincing people that they can be free online and express themselves freely. So
Connect
it's
and
a
share.
exactly connect, share, like, engage, and reveal, your innermost secrets. And what that creates is a kind of, what my PhD examiner actually describes this quite well. She calls it cloud geographies. And that basically means like datascapes that are almost like clouds, as in like they're constantly changing because it's real-time data. And it's less about you as an individual and more about all the relations between these data points, right? Um, the other good example is this idea that you need the haystack in order to find the needle. So where before, surveillance was about watching the needle, now surveillance is about gathering the
The
haystack
haystack.
so that we can see whatever doesn't look like hay. right? So it's like,
It's crazy. Yeah.
you understand what I mean? So it's like mass surveillance in order to analyze data in real time to find, abnormalities, and those abnormalities get surfaced as targets, as profiles and as targets. And
Yeah.
those profiles and targets then, become targets for advertising, but also targets for drone strikes and targets for like the more
Control.
control. Exactly. So
Yeah.
this is it's a different kind of paradigm that we're in. Anyway, sorry, that went very far from selective
Um,
disclosure.
yeah, but it was super good. I'm having a hard time not to react to every second thing that you're saying. But I want to share two things. I looked up a Foucault quote, which is my favorite quote from him, which relates to the panopticon, in which he says, "The panopticon must not be understood as a dream building. It's a diagram of a mechanism of power reduced to ideal form." So
Mm,
Foucault describes the panopticon as the ideal form of the mechanism of power. Just by pure surveillance, you control. And the other thing I can show is a book recommendation. It's Mindfuck from Chris Wiley, the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower guy. It's like a fictional kind of crime story, but in real life. So it's
yeah,
just super amazing to see like how these entities are being sent up internationally to mine and analyze our data and make the data clouds and sort of figure out how to mind wash each and every one of us by targeted advertising or content or fake content even. So
yeah,
it is the reason I'm still reading books like this actually because I still cannot grasp the extent of what's going on. So when you say it's a new thing that we just learned about, that we're being surveyed online, for me it's really much tangible in a way that I still need to input more information to understand how the internet works on a daily
yeah,
basis. it's
yeah,
it's it's really, that's the education part, I think, and this is also what's going to be, maybe I think it's might not be the easiest to change perspectives from we disclose everything and I tag my location, and like as we're going to talk a little bit more about Durov's arrest too, but there was also an Instagram influencer tagging all the locations and all the photos of where they went and what helicopter they took, and that's kind of how people treat these platforms more or less. And
yeah,
how do we change to a perspective where we kind of really think about what's appropriate for us to disclose from our private data at a given point in time. And I
yeah,
really like this. What you said, it's real life stuff is like this. When you meet someone for the first time, you don't normally know a lot about them, just what they on an interview, job interview. What I tell myself about myself to you, basically, and not
yeah,
everything of my metadata clouds floating around my head. Yeah.
yeah. No, exactly. Um, I mean, speaking of book recommendations, I'm also rereading a book that I read quite a while ago by this a South Korean philosopher called Byung-Chul Han, who does a critique actually of Foucault's uh, use of kind of Bentham's panopticon model. And because Foucault is very much focused on the body, right, the disciplining of the body and biopolitics. And what Byung-Chul is arguing is that we've actually moved to a kind of psychopolitics, and that it's not so much the disciplining of the body that's at the forefront now, as much as the disclosure and exploitation of the mind and the psyche, exactly through this kind of like the transparency of the self, this kind of compulsion to post online, like, and engage in ways that kind of reveal a lot of like subconscious and psychological dynamics.
So it's more
Um,
like a collective psyche that you mean when you say psyche.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and there was a lot of like thinking about this also earlier in the 2000s on understanding the internet as a collective consciousness, an expression of collective consciousness in a sense. And then if we understand the kind of commercialization of that, it is a kind of mass exploitation and industrialization of the collective consciousness. And that has consequences, right? Both in terms of mental health and also in terms of just basic, security and integrity of human beings and their communities.
Well said. At this point, I might stop the conversation and assure our audience that we see the fantastic questions in the chat, and but it's just such a nice flowy conversation that keep the questions going. We're gonna spend 15 minutes in the end answering the questions that you all asked. These are some super nice. I don't really want to go back to topics that we already passed, but yeah, do keep the questions coming, and we do around those. Yes. So now
But yeah,
yeah.
so selective disclosure, it's all about enabling people to actually decide who they reveal things to, and when and under what conditions. And that's, it's kind of like as basic and fundamental as that. But it's also, quite complicated actually to achieve in the digital world, not just technically, but also how to have it like make sense as a user experience. Because when we're doing selective disclosure in our daily lives, it's not like we need to kind of click buttons and like consent and do all this like extra admin. So the deeper question is, how do you enable selective disclosure in the digital world in a way that doesn't actually create an admin overhead for the individual, and an admin overhead that actually is not just annoying, but is also somewhat meaningless, exactly because the problem with mass surveillance is exactly the fact that it's mass, it's aggregate. So sometimes even if you choose to be, private about certain things, um, the actions of others and the fact that you choose to be private kind of singles you out already and turns you into a needle in the haystack, right? Um, and that's where the problem lies, is like actually, as Claudia says, privacy loves company. It needs to be a kind of like mass collective shift towards privacy as a kind of default, rather than just individual kind of like selection. So there are traps along the way, let's say, like selective disclosure. I think what we're going to see in the next few years, and I want people to pay attention here, like what we're going to see in the next few years is selective disclosure being like used to convince people for continued surveillance. So it's like, let's make surveillance the continued kind of like norm, the default, and then it becomes selective privacy rather than selective disclosure, and that's what I reckon is going to happen.
Mm,
Um,
that's
there's
very
much,
dangerous.
yeah, like we can go into kind of more complicated stuff around that if we want, when it comes to like zero knowledge, because I've got a lot of opinions there too. But yeah, anyway.
I wanted to flip around this coin for a second, because it's also one thing to develop privacy enhancing apps, but it's another thing, how do you develop them well enough if you don't know anything about the users? So it's also it's also something that we have challenges with on our day-to-day job, is that how do we improve the VPN app if we don't measure anything of how users interact with the buttons, or if we don't
Yeah,
record user interactions on the app, which is, we have to do it if we want to make a private service, but then again, we miss all this important data, how we could optimize the app and see where users churn, for example.
yeah.
So what's your, how do you approach this in the work part of the life?
Well, so we've got actually a whole project running on this. Our wonderful head of marketing, Rob, is working with our wonderful head of product, Mark, um, to basically surface what they would like or what they need to create and market an effective product, to our wonderful head of research, Anya. And Anya Prochowska is looking at a number of systems that Brave have been developing in particular. So Brave has this system called the STAR system, that effectively pre-filters. I mean, the easiest way to say it is it kind of pre-filters user behavior that might de-anonymize them. So if someone stands out, looks too much like a needle, let's say, in the haystack, and doesn't look enough like hay, they will be excluded from the data set. But we can still analyze the hay. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I just pasted a link with this star system to be
Yeah.
shared with our community.
So
It's
that's
super.
like yeah, that's a really interesting way of doing, user analytics, so that we can actually improve the app and make sure that we're doing things that help people achieve what they're trying to achieve, but without compromising their anonymity in any way whatsoever. So yeah, there's a whole project that we're running internally on that. And of course, alongside that, there's like much more clunky methodologies, which is literally just like run continuous kind of focus groups, right? Just continuously bring people in, do interviews with them, and just have a constant stream of kind of interviews and questionnaires, which is exactly, that's kind of selective disclosure in practice. Basically, is like people are selectively disclosing what they find as pain points and this and that in the application. Um,
I think it's a very good point in time to encourage all of our audience to please do help test us the app. Download the app, use the VPN, send your feedback to us on the channels that we have open for this. It matters more than in a usual product it would matter, because we rely a lot more on selectively disclosed user engaged feedback when someone discloses this feedback by their own sovereign free will, and not by us harvesting their clicks across an application. So guys, keep sending us feedback. It's really, really important. All right. Cool. I'm just looking at if you have some matching questions, but if not, no, actually, there's some questions with the token, some questions with the ZK stuff. Yeah, there's one question maybe you can chime in for two after this topic. Is Rossi was asking, talking about ZK ID, could this be implemented to protect the privacy of NIM node operators, especially gateway operators too? So will ZK NIMs, the unknown credentials, protect, or could they protect operator identities? I'm also thinking with you here together.
Let me think about where that would sit exactly in the stream. I mean, operators, I guess it could, in the sense of, no, there's not really any kind of, I don't think it helps that much, to be honest, because operators, in a sense, could, well, yes, okay, if there was, let's say, if there was a VPS provider, like one of the problems right now, right? If I'm thinking through the kind of entire
Flow.
process of, yeah, the flow of wanting to set up a node and run infrastructure for Nym, unless you literally have your own kind of server infrastructure at home and you're running everything yourself, you're likely running a node off of a VPS provider. If you're running a node off of a VPS provider, you're likely paying via some sort of, either crypto or credit card or this and that, which, potentially can link you. So of course, the first step is use a mixnet on each of those kind of interactions online. But then, what would actually have to happen here, or what could be interesting, is, having VPS, like, working on kind of B2B partnerships with VPS providers to actually use ZK NIMs as an interesting form of delinking of payments from services. So that's definitely one aspect. I'm not sure if the kind of threat model and the demand is high enough for that yet. But it's worth investigating. I mean, that would be the main point, because already, when it comes to actually bonding the node with tokens via a wallet, all of that is pseudonymous already. So once you've actually got the tokens, and set up
Brilliant.
your VPS, yeah, then you're kind of good to go, as long as you make sure you're using, a mixnet when you're bonding your tokens via the wallet, whatever. So it would be at that point, I would say, is like the payment of the actual VPS. That would be nice.
Yeah, actually, one of the first things how Sudo explained what NIM is for me, like a year and a half ago, was he was saying, imagine Google login, but saying ZK NIM login, and then it's only
Yeah,
proving the fact that I need to prove. And that was, wow, that's super cool. I don't need to give all my data for every login that I do. So this is the
yeah,
case that where this would also work at the VPS provider, but everywhere else, that we don't really need to share all of our data with all of the providers we do business with, just what
yeah.
they need to know. And it's also, yeah,
And I can see that Sudo also had a question here around whether I've read the
yeah.
OpenAI proof of personhood credential. Yes, I did read their paper, not the full thing yet, but the first section that explains the kind of high level. Um, and it does look very much like the coconut credential scheme, to be honest, with the exception that they're quite like they're not trying to kind of outline a general purpose schema here, and they're not aiming for eCash. They're aiming for, like, like coconut is more leaning to,
EID.
yeah, so they're more like DID. They're more focused on issuers only issuing one single credential, because you're supposed to be one whole human being. They're very concerned with that aspect of of proving like humanness, let's say. And that's where the whole irony of this paper and like my personal critique comes from, is
Retina
like,
scanning.
well, well, I mean, well, retina scanning one thing, but it's not even. I mean, this paper, interestingly, I think because of all the reaction towards WorldCoin, um, the paper actually explicitly says this doesn't have to include biometrics. So they are trying to create something that's a little bit more general purpose, where like proof of personhood credentials could, for example, take advantage of existing national identity systems, but just creating that delinking. So proving that you've got a national identity of some sort, which means that you have registered as a human being with some sort of state entity, but then delinking the actual identity document from any kind of usage online. So it's interesting, and it's definitely got rid of a lot of the things that I was critical of from WorldCoin. But but yeah, it's more like just the iron, and they have some good researchers that were participating in writing the paper. It's, you know, a lot of people on board with that. But it is like that kind of irony of like, you have, you know, OpenAI that has effectively created a huge social problem online, by, you know, rolling out ChatGPT and not working very closely with potentially affected parties. And then they kind of like, so they create a problem and then they sell the solution. It's kind of similar to like what big pharma, you know, big pharma.
You put it super mildly, like you put it like so nicely, but they kind of forget to tell everyone that they're harvesting all the internet data. You know, I was just gonna copy everything and put it into this big machine, and
Yeah, yeah. So like it's a little bit infuriating to see how OpenAI and WorldCoin try and kind of become like the, like, I don't know, try
world
and become,
government tooling.
well, there's that, but also that they try and portray themselves as like privacy friendly or advancing privacy, when actually they're the ones that are like, they're literally building on, you know, mass surveillance derivatives is like what they've actually built on, right? And you know, you have a previous general of the NSA on the OpenAI board and everything. It's not, you know what I mean? It's not friendly stuff. Like they've created the problem that they're then pitching this solution for. So, you know, but anyway, the schema in isolation is fairly interesting, and it's a well written paper. So, you know.
I'm trying to sit in the meantime in a position where my face is not like half cut by a sun ray, but it's really hard.
Selective sunshine.
Selective sunshine, please. Like some selective shade is just moving quicker than I thought.
Selective shade.
Yeah. All right. Do you want to take just for a lighter note? Do you want to take a bunch of Nym VPN questions? I think these are like because someone asking this. Sorry.
Sudo, link to the coconut paper instead.
Yeah, link our paper, please. Or Sal, please, can you link the coconut paper? It's a super cool paper. Actually, it's a lot easier to understand than you would expect such paper to be. That was my impression when reading the coconut paper for the first
Yeah.
time. Yeah, it's a lot less, I don't know, technically detailed, or it's abstract, but it kind of somehow makes sense when you read it. Someone is asking in the chat, is there any plan to design more products which focus on fingerprint resistance like Tor browser? And I think it's kind of two questions here. Are we planning to do a browser? And I think that whoever Maximilian is posting maybe not aware that the Nym VPN is actually, I think, the fingerprint resistance tool that you're looking for. So if you want to get rid of your digital fingerprint, that's what the Nym VPN enables you to do with the 5-hop mode. You can send in data packets over the internet without metadata being recorded. So that's kind of the tool that Nym is developing in the past year.
Yeah, I was a bit confused by Maximilian's question initially, because I thought it meant like literal fingerprinting, given that we're talking
Ah,
about biometrics.
or
Um,
maybe.
yeah, well, I don't know how browsers help for literal fingerprinting, but for website fingerprinting, absolutely, Maximilian. And maybe Sal, you can dig out. I think Anya has got some papers on website fingerprinting, and how mixed nets perform against website fingerprinting attacks. But yes, indeed, Max, there is that is what the Nym VPN / mixnet protects against. There's no immediate plans to launch a browser. It could happen in the future, and maybe someone else is interested in building a browser on top of the Nym mixnet. For now, we're focusing on the VPN, and then B2B integrations on the mixnet, and then, as mentioned, more general purpose use cases for ZK NIMs.
Yeah, or we can just also integrate into an existing privacy browser at any
Yeah.
point in time in the future, which makes sense. All right. There's another question with the VPN. If it, maybe just I just roll with this. So how will monetization work for the VPN product in the future? Like, there's no information online yet if it's a paid version yet, but I think we can answer this question easily.
The short answer is yes.
Monthly
It's
plans, uh,
yeah. Go ahead.
bundled plans. Yeah, there's going to be monthly payment plans and bundled payment plans, and you can subscribe for a longer period for cheaper, basically, as every other similar VPN product is being priced at the moment. And
Yeah.
I don't think we have price points on the website yet, so it's public beta. This is a still testing period, so we're still looking for people to test and give feedback on the product, and we want to make sure it works pretty solid before we start charging money for the
Yeah.
users.
Exactly. And then, payments will happen both in fiat and crypto as well. So, but yeah, it's paid subscription. That's the monetization basically.
And maybe one thing to mention at this point too, that all the payments going to be converted to Nym token purchases, and this is also what's going to drive our infinite value machine tokenomics happening. As more subscribers come and more users going to use the mixnet via the VPN, the more purchasing pressure is going to be on the Nym token. And there was a question I think earlier, also maybe from Rossio. Yes, this is quite relates to the token in a way. In your words, how would you describe a utility token? And I think it's a good point to define utility token,
Yeah.
because go ahead.
So, well, utilities are the basic things that we need in life, right? It's water, it's electricity, and it's in fact secure communications. From our perspective, private secure communications is a basic utility that anyone needs. And so when we say utility token, it's a token that gives access to and enables the continued provision of that utility. That's the kind of very short definition. But yeah, so and then in the back end, it solves all kinds of problems around decentralization and permissionlessness. So, and this is something that is like, points to the question of like why, because there's always, for people, especially people that are like skeptical of tokens, there's this question of why do you have a token and not just like pay people in dollars or, euros or yen or whatever. Tokens have, very particular characteristics that allow them to be integrated into systems that help for certain security, to enable certain security features. In our case, it's decentralizing the infrastructure. So what that means is when you have a decentralized network, and now we're talking about the mixnet, not the blockchain, but the mixnet itself. The question is, how do you know what nodes are part of that network or not? And that's called a kind of directory authority, right? So usually that would be like some single place where you have like a list of which nodes are included and which nodes are excluded. And the question is, who gets to decide what that list should be? And that's a potential vulnerability, right? If someone can construct malicious paths if they just put all of their nodes into that list. So this is where we actually use the token to solve that problem, by making it open for anybody to join as an operator, as long as they have Nym tokens and enough stakers to stake on their node. So that is a kind of permissionless system where people can join as operators, create a kind of like collective immune system for a kind of towards a network takeover, and actually have a functioning decentralized network. And then that token simultaneously serves for the entire payment flow, so that value can actually circulate through the network and out to the network of operators, from the subscriptions to the network of operators.
Super well said. Thank you so much for explaining this. Dear Lyrex, your question is beyond the level that I understand about technical stuff. I'm not even sure if I read it out. Does the recent Intel SGX root key extraction vulnerability pose a threat to machines running the Mixnet VPN? So the machines running on VPS providers, physical machines, and I don't know what's the recent Intel SGX root key extraction vulnerability that you mentioned here. So
No, but
maybe,
maybe Sudo or Sal wanna
yeah,
ping some people on the team and see if they're looking into that.
yeah, we're gonna make a note of this and we're gonna do a short investigation if that's something we need to be aware of. Thanks for letting us know.
Yeah.
I, I Defty might be well aware. We just,
Yeah.
right?
So
Yeah.
Ilian's question, why is Nym price 99.99% down? I don't think it's that many percentage down. That would be kind of actually technically impossible. But I understand your sentiment. I understand your sentiment, and it's never nice. But it's one of these things when it comes to crypto. Like for me, rule number one is you can't let your mental health or your emotional well-being, go up and down along with the market like that, because that's when you start making bad investment decisions. That's exactly when people start, selling when at a low point, and then buying at an all-time high, and that's exactly how you get, rinsed. So that's like the first thing that I want to say there is like, if people start getting too depressed about a low token price, it's like maybe it's not a healthy game for you in the first place. But then, of course, I also understand the frustration. The Nym token price has not been performing very well lately. And there's lots of reasons for that. First of all, the altcoin market overall has been down, but also we need to get the product out. At the end of the day, Nym as a project is not a project that is like particularly keen on doing a lot of like pumping from a marketing perspective. We actually want to focus as much as possible on building the real product, which will, drive the real value in the long term. And that's where we're actually kind of hoping to see, serious gains, not this kind of short-term pump, because that kind of just undermines and ruins the project from the get-go. So yeah, that's just to address that question. I feel your pain, but honestly, we're here to build some real tech with real value, and that's where we see most of the value of coming towards the token.
Exactly, and we kind of do these calls too, and we do a lot of publishing a lot of articles and talk a lot about this exactly to create a community and educate our investors and stakers in a way that this we're here for the long run. We're building actual stuff, and this is not like a pump and dump scheme where we say some fluffy things and then run away, but it's more the exact opposite. And I think that with what we started with the call, that as the space matures, these projects gonna inherently shine through the crowds and millions of just pumped token prices and kind of get rich quick looking schemes that are populating still the space. So our immune system gonna throw these out, and what's gonna stay is the projects that deliver, create actual real life value, such as privacy. And yeah, just to answer one quick question to Maximilian again, you're asking the same question again. So Nym VPN does help with delinking unique device, personal information, operating system information, browser version, user agent information. If you use the 5-hop Nym VPN, this is exactly what anyone who surveys network won't be able to tell of your browsing history. So this is what Nym VPN is about. Yes, there's a question about any upcoming partnerships that we want to selectively disclosely hint about upcoming partnerships.
I can selectively disclose that it might have to do with data availability.
That's already a great alpha.
It's great alpha. And you can do your own research on who's big on data availability. Right, and then let's see here.
There's a personal question for you if you want to take it. What's challenging currently in your work at Nym from Khaled?
Oh my God, Khaled, the most challenging thing is Sudo and Hux. I have to deal with them every day.
It was such an easy one. Khaled, you shouldn't, give so high balls for Jaya because we're gonna,
No, in more serious terms, the most challenging part of working day to day at Nym is Nym is a project that right now is going through a huge growth spurt. So we've had a lot of new team members join over the past year. We're launching a product. There is crazy geopolitical shifts happening, regulation, Durov arrest, this and that. So I would say the biggest challenge is making sure that I dedicate the right amount of time to each of these different questions. So, first of all, as a company scales, you have to build the internal structures and processes and systems of the company. But while you're doing that, you have to make sure that the work is actually also getting done, and actually, we're pushing out a real product in the meantime. And then while you're doing that, you also need to make sure that you're staying on top of real world developments. So I would say, like, getting the balance right of paying enough attention to each of these different parts is the most challenging.
Ooh, I could go into a long selected disclosure rant right now, but I'm not gonna do it because we only have 9 minutes left. Uh, so maybe next time. But what I wanted to, there was one more. Yeah, we didn't really talk about the whole Durov thing. I just want to maybe ask one question to because we said we're gonna talk about this recent news as well. So there's a super cool article out on the Nym blog, which is connected to exactly this story and how it affects privacy. But what's your short take on this, Jaya? Is this a good or a bad thing, or what does this mean that this arrest can happen just out of the blue?
I mean, it's never a great thing to see a person working in tech being put to prison like that, because, or arrested, because at the end of the day, you know the charges are about crimes that were happening via the Telegram app. Those criminals are not the people that have been arrested, right? And that's kind of, that's never a great thing. Um, Having said that, like, let's say my quick takeaway is, number one, there's been a huge misunderstanding of Telegram app as being a privacy preserving app. It's not. This was not just a misunderstanding, but this was like misinformation that Telegram was deliberately putting out there over the past half a year that has proven incredibly dangerous and damaging to the entire, privacy tech community. So, you had that happen. Um, in the meantime, Telegram is not privacy preserving, which then means that, of course, the content on the app is visible, and therefore you see Durov getting arrested for these activities happening on the app, which then in the meantime gives a really bad reputation for privacy apps, because people then associate privacy apps with that sort of crime. So it's almost like this double bind, right? That overall just perpetuates this major misunderstanding of privacy technology as being related to crime and criminals, when actually it's the inverse. Secure communications makes everybody more secure.
Uh, I do think they have the secret chat is end-to-end encrypted though, right, on Telegram. Uh,
Yeah, so
about
if
yeah,
you wanna enable end-to-end encryption, you can, but it doesn't work for
not
group
group
chats.
chats.
Yeah.
And on this note, I listened to a some podcast around like Russian OPSEC influencers who try to analyze, like try to really dissect this question. If what does this mean, and kind of, and they come to the conclusion that basically the big thing why such arrest can happen is that because A, what you said, they don't know enough about the platform. B, too, that they kind of the platform is censoring some sort of content. If some sort of if certain types of content appear in public groups that's being monitored by bots, then it gets flagged and gets removed, such as like super violent pictures, videos, etc. And I think that kind of the Russian OPSEC influencers come to the conclusion that the reason why France want to arrest Durov is because he's not really complying with their censorship requests as quick or as effectively as with the maybe Russian censorship requests. And kind of this
Yeah,
is where maybe the data clouds that you mentioned earlier, like there's these clouds are fighting for territory, like the European data cloud
yeah.
wants to have more Russian data or
I
control
mean, I
maybe.
definitely I definitely have the feeling that there's something deeper and geopolitical going on here, and that, the charges that we're seeing is like, mm, yeah, I think it's okay. It's easy to end up in some sort of conspiracy hole on this arrest. So be a little bit careful. But, like, I don't think that the charges are one thing, but I think there's a lot more probably going on in the background here that we're just not aware of quite yet. So it's hard to make kind of definite statements on it, other than like statements on the immediate effects of the arrest, which is again, as I was saying, giving a really bad reputation to privacy tech. One thing that I'm very keen on trying to work towards is stop this kind of like regulators versus technologists discourse, and actually show how, you know, privacy preserving technologies can actually enable regulatory compliance in a positive way, in the sense that, like, you know, you minimize data that's, first of all, fully compliant with the GDPR. It ensures, you know, secure communications, and yes, it's using strong cryptography, but strong cryptography exactly to promote the regulators' agenda, so that they stop seeing us as the enemy, and stop criminalizing cryptography in that sense.
Yeah, and actually, Durov in one of his interviews says he goes one step further, and when someone asks this question, he goes, "Okay, criminals also use Android phones and Intel chips, and when do we start banning Microsoft software because people also use that for criminal Excel sheet
Yeah.
activities?" So tech neutrality is a super important thing, that the tech is not what should be banned or regulated. It's the certain user groups and police should do their police work to find the criminals who are using these platforms. There's a
Mm.
lot of other ways to tackle criminal activity other than putting tech founders into jail and sort of ransom, like getting the codes from them, or just making them stop the platform. I think this is where I feel that things are getting real, as more and more of these really unjustified, at least from my perspective, arrests are happening with tech founders who are building tools that people can use. It's this is the maybe this is what you were saying, to stop this divide or this dichotomy between regulators and privacy tech developers, because it's not the
Yeah.
fight. The fight is not happening here; it's happening somewhere entirely else.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's also worth noting, like, you know, yesterday there was a fantastic interview that came out with Meredith Whittaker, who's the president of Signal App, right? And Signal App is an end-to-end encrypted messaging application that is effectively like set the kind of gold standard for secure messaging, that also, you know, WhatsApp are also using their protocol, right? So, um, and in that interview, you know, they say that, okay, Meredith lives in Paris, right? So uh but she's not being arrested. Do you know what I mean? So that there's obviously something going on here, where it's like, if you build actual privacy and actually privacy preserving technology, you reduce the risk, both as an app developer, but also for your users, and, you know, you can actually satisfy regulation as a result. So it's like, in general, privacy just reduces vulnerabilities, and that's like overall a good thing, and it reduces your own business vulnerabilities as well, and your own vulnerabilities as an app developer. So this is, again, I'm saying this to try and kind of shift people out of this like mindset that, like, "Ooh, they're gonna come after us if we're building privacy preserving technology." Like, it doesn't have to be that way, and we have to kind of, like, normalize it and continue to normalize it, and we can see, you know, evidence that, that it's not like they're going after everybody right now, so.
Yeah, and I think with I just read this lawyer comparison somewhere, that with the paper that the French authorities use for Durov, it could be just as well used for Mark Zuckerberg anytime, with
Yeah, yeah,
with WhatsApp basic. It's just like the same thing works.
yeah.
Uh, I've seen a really good, maybe a last question. Yeah, from Anderson Lacerda asks that could we expect a kind of social app like Telegram developed by Nym? And I wanna just answer quickly that there was a demo app, like a very simple chat app that was using the Mixnet, and which is kind of hasn't been maintained by the team. And we're on the lookout. So if someone feels like developing a very simple chat application that uses the Mixnet, our ears are super open and would welcome such ninja or developer from our community who would do such thing. Yes, and I think our time is over. So I just want to thank you, Jaya, for coming on the community call today. I really enjoyed. I hope you liked it too, and I think it was great. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Pleasure to just be chatting a bit with the community again, um, and yeah, it's been a huge week. Oh my god, so many things happening. The beta public launch, the rebrand workshop, the delisting, the new listing coming through,
The new
um
integration, maybe.
yeah, 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 and of course, like the kind of pretty shocking news of Durov's arrest as well. So like, yeah, it's been a lot over the past week.
Yeah, and before Sudo takes my head from the chat, I know, Sudo, that we have a pop-up as usual. We have a pop-up today for you guys. Thanks a lot for coming on the call, and thanks a lot more for your super intelligent and very well-phrased questions. We hope that you like the answers. Come to next week too, because we do have something also super special in mind for next week. Sal, can you please post the pop-up link, and maybe we don't have a slide about the secret phase, but I hope I remember the secret phase well. The secret, yes, the secret phase is in the chat, is public beta with big P
Yeah.
and big B.
And
Celebrate
just
this big week.
answer the last question by Abdullah. What would Nym do if any president from US or France or whatsoever asked for user metadata? It's a great question. We can't do anything because we don't have it, right? So this is the key point. You know, if you don't hold the data, you can't hand it over. You're minimizing the vulnerability for yourself and for your users. So that's the point of building privacy-preserving technology is, yeah, reduce the overall vulnerability and create secure rails of communication for everyone. Nice.
Fantastic closing sentence. Nothing more to add to that. Thank you for coming. Thank you guys for joining the community call. It has been amazing. Let's meet next week.